Hi, I'm Riven. I was just the quiet brother at my sister's wedding until her husband grabbed the mic and called me a parasite in front of 200 guests. And my sister? She looked down, didn't say a word. I thought that moment would break me. But then his boss stood up, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You're fired." What happened after that changed everything. Want to know why he really turned pale? I got there early, not out of obligation, no one asked me to, but because I thought maybe I could help. Maybe I could make myself useful again. I parked 2 blocks down. The hotel lot was full, and part of me was glad. The walk gave me time to prepare for whatever version of the family I was about to face today. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the banquet hall behind the Oak Ridge Inn. Rustic, cozy, all exposed beams and dim lighting. The kind of place people book because it looks like a Pinterest board. I adjusted my collar in the reflection of a dusty window and walked in through the side door. The room buzzed. Laughter from Marwan's cousins I hadn't seen in years. The clatter of silverware being arranged. A faint scent of cinnamon from whatever dessert they'd prepped for later. I scanned the room, looking for her, my sister. I didn't find her first. I found a volunteer, clipboard in hand, hustling between tables. She spotted me and smiled. "Oh, you must be Reeve Halton." She handed me a name tag with practiced cheer. I blinked. Riven Halden, actually." She looked confused for a second. "Oh, well, your brother-in-law said this was right. He insisted." "Of course he did." I took the tag anyway, held it between my fingers like it might burn a hole through my skin. Reeve Halton. It wasn't a typo, it was a message. I caught Marwan's eyes across the room, briefly, just long enough for her to realize I noticed. She dropped her gaze like it was a hot plate, pretended to adjust a centerpiece, pretended I wasn't standing there with someone else's name pinned to my chest. That was Darian for you. The kind of guy who didn't throw punches. He let you bleed out in small, invisible ways. I wandered toward the seating chart, hoping, foolishly, that things might still turn around. They hadn't. My name, or rather, Reeve Halton's, was listed on a tiny tent card near the damn kitchen door. Not with a family, not even near people I recognized. Practically in exile. I could smell dishwater from the swinging doors behind my chair. "Private spot," Darian said, grinning as he walked past. "Figured you'd like a little quiet time, right?" The way he said it, loud enough for others to hear, like he was doing me a favor. Some laughed, some just looked down. One of my cousins leaned in. "Why'd they stick you over here?" he asked, voice low. I shrugged. "Guess I'm the quiet one." He gave me a sympathetic look. I hated it. I sat. Tried not to let the heat in my face show. Tried not to crumble in front of a plate of catered chicken and wild rice. Tried not to remember that just 6 months ago, I was the lead engineer on a multi-million-dollar project. Now I was the punchline at my sister's wedding. Darian was working the room like a politician, clapping backs, flashing teeth, sipping something expensive from a short glass. He stopped by a group near the bar and said, just loud enough, "He's our family's quiet project. Been out of work for months, but hey, we keep him afloat." I didn't look up, didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. I glanced at Marwan. She was standing a few feet behind him, arms folded, eyes locked on the floor. Again, like the floor could explain why she wouldn't speak up for her brother. I excused myself, stepped outside into the crisp air, the kind that hinted at incoming rain. Leaves crunched under my shoes. The name tag was still in my hand. Reeve Halton. It made sense in a twisted way. Darian didn't just want to humiliate me, he wanted to erase me, rewrite me. And Marwyn, she was letting him. I considered tossing the tag, but instead I folded it in half, tucked it into my pocket. Not wearing it was the only thing I controlled tonight. I stayed outside a while, long enough to remind myself why I came. Not for Darian, not even for Marwyn, but because showing up was the one thing I still knew how to do. I went back in, took my seat near the kitchen, picked at the food, nodded politely at strangers, played my part. And then I felt it. The shift in the air. That silence that means someone just walked in who wasn't supposed to be there. I looked up, and everything changed. The energy in the room shifted before I even turned to look. Conversations dimmed like someone had pulled the plug on a light source we didn't realize we were using. The hum of idle chatter dissolved into a low murmur. I followed everyone else's gaze, and that's when I saw him. Grant Mercer. He walked in without ceremony, but somehow commanded more attention than Darian had all evening. Tall, confident without needing to flaunt it, Grant carried himself like someone who knew he didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. A man who didn't smile unless it mattered. A man whose silence said more than Darian's entire rehearsed personality ever could. I wasn't the only one who noticed the effect. Darian straightened like a reflex. He smoothed the front of his blazer, adjusted the cuffs on his shirt, and plastered on a grin so wide it bordered on desperation. I watched Darian become a different man, and for the first time that day, I felt a shift in me too. Because fear, that raw, unsettled kind, had found its way into Darian Holt. He looked like a schoolboy trying to impress a principal. Grant scanned the room casually, nodding at a few people, but when his eyes landed on me, something happened. He paused, just long enough that I noticed, just long enough that I wondered. His expression didn't change much, but there was a flicker, a second of recognition, like he knew me, or thought he did. Before I could figure out what it meant, Darian swooped in. "Oh, Grant," he called out, tone suddenly theatrical. "This is Marwyn's brother. Don't worry about the name. He's not important." The last part he said with a laugh, like it was just a quirky inside joke. The kind people in power use to make you feel small in front of others. Some people chuckled. I didn't. Grant's eyes shifted to Darian. He blinked slowly, like someone taking mental notes they plan to revisit later. I didn't say anything. What could I say? But I felt it. The sting. That invisible bruise you get when your own family decides to serve you up like entertainment. The introductions kept rolling. Toasts were made. Laughter returned. I slipped further into the background. Then Darian decided to double down. He cleared his throat as the room quieted for a round of informal introductions. "Grant," he began, a little too loudly, "I'd like you to meet Riven, our family's resident jobless wonder. Been living off the generosity of others for, 2 years now?" It was a joke. To him. To the few coworkers who chuckled nervously, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or feel awkward. But to me, it was a knife, and he twisted it right in front of everyone. I froze. My hands stayed in my lap, but my jaw clenched so tight I thought my molars might crack. Marwyn was 10 feet away. She looked down again. No protest, no awkward laugh. Just shame. Or maybe guilt. Either way, it cut deeper than Darian's words. Grant didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to Darian and studied him for a beat too long. No anger, just calculation, like he was deciding where to file that moment away. I needed air. I slipped to the side, pulled out my phone like I had some important message waiting. There wasn't, and found a quiet corner by the entrance to the cocktail lounge. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something denser than that, something older. I had thought, maybe stupidly, that after losing my job, Marwin might help me find a new one. Not through Darian, God no, but maybe a connection, a name, a nudge in the right direction. But this told me everything. She wasn't going to help. Not because she didn't care, but because caring would mean standing up to him, and she couldn't do that. Or wouldn't. I reached into my pocket and felt the folded name tag again. Still there. Reeve Halton. A lie printed on cheap sticker paper, but somehow heavier than anything else I carried. I was still standing there when Grant appeared at my side. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. I turned, caught off guard. "Yeah," I lied. "Just stepped away for a second." He nodded, not buying it, but not pushing either. "You look familiar," he said after a moment. "Where'd you work before?" "Arcadia Engineering," I answered, his brow lifted just slightly. "Civil or mechanical?" "Mechanical, 8 years." He didn't say anything for a beat, just studied me, like he was solving a puzzle only he could see the shape of. Before I could ask why he was curious, Darian reappeared, of course. "There you are," he said too cheerfully. "Grant, come on. You have to meet my Uncle Rick. He's been dying to talk numbers." Grant offered a tight smile. "Of course." But as Darian guided him away, Grant's eyes stayed on me a second longer than necessary. The moment passed, and with it, the last of whatever dignity I thought I might recover tonight. I barely had time to breathe before Darian turned the screws again. "We've got a little change of plans," he told me, loud enough for others to hear. "One of the staff canceled last minute. Think you could help with setup?" I blinked. "You want me to—" "Just a few trays, maybe some place cards. Keeps you busy, right?" And that was it. No room to say no. No point arguing. The rest of the evening blurred. People started asking me things. Where the gift table was, if I knew when dessert would be out, if the slideshow was ready. They thought I worked there. And I didn't correct them. I played along, quietly, efficiently. But inside, something was shifting. Darian wasn't humiliating me anymore. He was making me disappear, turning me into a function, a shadow, the help. Eventually, I found myself outside again. Same spot, same window. Only now, night had fallen and the lights inside cast golden pools across the floor. I saw Darian through the glass, laughing like he'd already won something. Arms wide, head tilted back. And I thought, he's winning right now. And I'm letting him. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. I didn't clench my fists or swear revenge. I just decided, not tonight. But someday soon, this would shift. I turned away from the window and walked back inside. And as I stepped back inside, I didn't realize Darian had already planned his next move against me. The second I re-entered the banquet hall, I noticed something had shifted again. Only this time, the change wasn't in the room. It was in me. The warmth from the string lights above had faded into background haze. The music played on, a jazzy instrumental trying too hard to keep the mood light. Laughter came from scattered corners. But beneath it all, I sensed something brewing. And it wasn't just my own unease. Darian was waiting for me. He stood casually near the catering table, his posture relaxed, but his eyes tracking me like a spotlight. He waved me over with that phony grin stretched across his face, the one he used when he wanted to seem charming, not threatening. I walked toward him slowly, bracing for whatever this was. "Hey," he said low, leaning in so no one else could hear. Let's not have any scenes tonight, all right? Do me a favor. Stay out of Grant's way. His tone was sugar-coated, but the meaning underneath was sharp. Not a request, a warning. I met his eyes. You worried I'll embarrass you? He chuckled softly. I'm saying I've worked hard to build something here. I don't need you stumbling around, making people uncomfortable with your situation. I held his gaze. I wasn't planning to embarrass anyone, I said, my voice calm. Can't say the same for you. The smile faded, just for a second. He didn't reply, just patted my shoulder like a coach giving a benched player fake encouragement and turned away, already shifting his expression for the next conversation. A few minutes later, I found out what he meant by staying out of Grant's way. I passed by a circle of guests standing near the bar, 2 of Darian's co-workers, a couple of cousins, and a woman I vaguely recognized from the country club crowd. Darian stood at the center, drink in hand, delivering his next act with ease. Riven's always been the sensitive one, he said, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. Gets a little dramatic when people joke. You know how it is. Not everyone handles unemployment with grace. He chuckled, pausing for the polite laugh from his audience, which he got. And what can you do? Family's family. You take them in, feed them, keep their spirits up. It's like charity, but closer to home. My jaw tightened. I stood just far enough back that they hadn't seen me approach, but close enough to hear every word. Marwyn was nearby. She glanced at Darian, then at me, just for a second. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she might say something, but she didn't. She looked away. That was worse than the words, because it told me what I already knew, but hadn't let myself fully accept. She heard the lie, saw the damage, and still chose not to speak. Grant stood across the room, a drink in hand. He watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. His gaze didn't shift much, but it lingered. I caught it. Just long enough to recognize that he wasn't buying Darian's act, wholesale. For a flicker of a moment, I felt, not supported exactly, but seen. And then someone tapped my arm. A woman in a black dress shirt with a staff name badge handed me a note. From the coordinator, she said. The note was short. A task reassignment. Apparently they were short on hands for the drink station. Could I manage refilling pitchers and checking on the coffee dispensers? I stared at it for a moment, then looked up across the room to where Darian was now laughing with 2 of his employees. Of course. I folded the paper slowly, slipped it into my pocket next to the cursed name tag, and headed toward the drink table. It didn't take long for the shift to happen. Someone asked if I could bring more ice. Another pointed to the punch bowl. Then a cousin smirked and said, "Well, at least he's useful tonight, huh?" They weren't trying to be cruel. That was the worst part. They thought this was normal, appropriate, expected. I moved on autopilot, pouring, fetching, wiping down the counter, my mind somewhere else entirely. I didn't feel angry at that moment. I didn't even feel embarrassed. I felt numb, like I was finally seeing the full outline of the thing I'd only glimpsed before. The shape of how they saw me, not as a brother, not even as a man, just a placeholder, someone you talk around not to, someone you assign jobs to keep them busy, out of the way. That's when a cousin brushed past me in a hurry, barely noticing he'd knocked into my shoulder. "Move, buddy," he muttered, not even turning around. And just like that, I was back in high school. A memory hit me, clearer than the music playing overhead. Marwyn and I were at a soccer game. I was maybe 11. She was already in high school, popular, busy with friends. I had gotten in trouble that week. Something about standing up to a teacher who called me lazy when I hadn't turned in an assignment I never received. I looked to her for support. She shrugged. "He probably had a reason," she said. "Just stay quiet. You'll make it worse." That pattern had repeated so many times, I'd stopped counting. With teachers, with her ex-boyfriends, with our parents. Always the same result. She avoided conflict, even if it meant letting me take the fall, even if it meant letting me disappear. This night wasn't new. It was just louder. I stood there for a long while, staring at the back wall of the banquet room, my hands still on a coffee carafe. My reflection wavered in the chrome, and for the first time, I saw what they saw. Not someone worth defending, just someone convenient to ignore. I spotted Marwen near the hallway entrance. She was standing alone for once, not mid-conversation. I walked toward her, finally ready to say something real. Something I should have said years ago. But before I could get a word out, she spotted me coming and turned away. Quick, rehearsed. She walked toward the florist, pointing at some centerpiece, avoiding eye contact like it was a skill she'd trained in. And that was it. Not dramatic, not explosive, but final. I didn't follow her. Instead, I stepped through the glass doors to the patio. The night air had cooled, the sky almost purple now, holding the last light of dusk. I stood there quietly, arms crossed, staring out at the dark trees beyond the parking lot. This isn't just a bad night, I thought. This is who they think I am. Not someone to help, not someone to love, just someone to manage, correct, reassign, contain. And I had let it happen, again and again. I reached into my pocket and felt the folded name tag, creased and curled from being carried all night. Reeve Halton. That wasn't my name, but maybe it was who they wanted me to be. A mistake, a blur, an afterthought. I closed my hand around it tightly. Inside me, something shifted, not loudly, but unmistakably. The hurt hadn't gone away, but it was changing, reorganizing. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something closer to fire. And that was the moment I realized Darian wasn't done. Not even close. He really believes I won't fight back. I stayed out on the patio for a while, watching the light shift inside the hall. The warmth of earlier had dissolved into polished performances, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, laughter that sounded rehearsed. Then I heard the MC tapping the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please gather for the dinner seating and welcome speeches." Reluctantly, I re-entered. The tables were lit with votive candles now, and the board listing seat assignment stood beside the stage. I walked slowly toward it, half hoping this part of the evening might go unnoticed. They were calling names one by one. I waited near the back, hands in my pockets, trying to look like I wasn't listening. Then I heard my name, or at least a version of it. Rivenhalder? The MC stumbled. A few heads turned. I stepped forward, forcing a smile. The board confirmed what I'd already sensed. My name, misspelled again, was scrawled onto a last-minute place card taped beneath the chart. I wasn't at the family table. I wasn't even near the other extended relatives. My assigned seat? A two-top round beside the hallway leading to the restrooms. I stood there a beat too long, staring at it. Someone behind me cleared their throat. A few whispers trickled out. I heard one woman say softly, "That can't be right." Another muttered, "Poor guy." And there it was, Darian's newest little masterpiece. I turned to glance across the room and caught Marwen's gaze, just briefly. She looked away immediately. shifting her wine glass in her hand like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the world. A woman I didn't know well, maybe one of our aunt's old church friends, came up beside me. Her voice was low. "I thought you'd be sitting with them. You okay, sweetheart?" I didn't answer. I just nodded. That whisper, though, soft and simple as it was, meant something. It was the first time anyone outside the triangle of me, Marwin, and Darian had acknowledged the cruelty out loud, and that made it real. I took my seat alone. Not long after, Darian climbed the few steps to the stage and grabbed the mic. He didn't wait for the MC. "All right," he said, voice booming. "I know these things are usually full of boring speeches, but I figured I'd give you all a laugh." A few polite chuckles. He grinned. "Every family's got one, right? That one relative who just can't seem to land right. Always in between jobs, living with someone else, finding themselves. You know what I mean." There were some laughs, confused but obliging. Then he locked eyes with me. "Riven, buddy," he said, chuckling into the mic. "Don't worry. When you finally get a job, we'll upgrade your seat." The laughter this time didn't come. It cracked, awkward, scattered. The silence that followed was louder than the joke. I scanned the room. Grant Mercer, seated halfway down the main table, leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened slightly. No smile. Marwin didn't even lift her eyes. I sat motionless. My face burned, not from the insult, but from the calmness I was trying so hard to hold. I stared down at my plate, fingers curling into fists on either side. Don't cry. Don't storm out. Don't let him win. I gripped the edge of the table so hard it hurt. In the swirl of clinking glasses and murmured conversations, my ears buzzed. My throat tightened like it always did when I was 12, and had to sit in the back seat while adults made decisions around me. For the first time that evening, I thought about walking out. But something deep, buried under years of swallowing pride, whispered, "Don't. Not yet." The room slowly returned to its rhythm. Later, Grant made his way to me again, this time without Darian hovering nearby. He approached with a quiet calm, hands in his pockets. "You don't deserve that," he said. "None of this." I gave him a small smile. It didn't have much weight behind it. He paused, then added, "Where'd you say you worked before?" "Westgrove Systems," I said. "Design team, engineering, and modeling." His eyebrows lifted just slightly. "That's a serious firm," he said. I nodded. There was a pause. Not an awkward one, just waited. "I figured," he said finally. "You don't carry yourself like someone useless." He didn't wait for a response, just gave me a small nod and walked off. That was something. About half an hour later, I remembered I'd left a small folder, notes and sketches for a side project I'd been toying with. In the prep hallway behind the main room, I made my way down the side corridor, past the kitchen doors and coat racks. The hallway was dimmer, quieter. As I rounded the corner, I stopped. Voices. I leaned back slightly, staying hidden behind a pillar. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words rooted me in place. Darian's voice, unmistakable. "Watch this. Tomorrow, I'm going to make sure Riven doesn't even show up in the wedding photos." A snort of laughter followed, one of his co-workers. "You're brutal, man." "No, seriously," Darian continued. "Photographers got a list. Riven's not on it. Marwin's already agreed to keep him out of the key shots. You know, just the real family." The other guy wheezed. "What's he gonna do?" Darian said. "He depends on her. He won't fight back." I stood there frozen, but something inside me cracked, not in a loud, violent way, but like ice breaking beneath steady heat. All the insults tonight, all the stage dismissals, they weren't flukes. They were intentional, coordinated. And the worst part? He was right. I hadn't fought back. Not once. I reached for the folder quietly, then stepped back down the hall without a sound. By the time I returned to the ballroom doors, my breath had steadied. The rage hadn't. But it had changed shape, more like steel now than fire. Darian stood near the dessert table, his hand resting on Marwan's back, laughing easily. He looked untouchable. But that moment, standing in the dark, something in me settled. He really believes I won't fight back. And that belief was going to be his first mistake. And right then, I knew the real war would start before the night was over. I barely made it 5 steps back into the ballroom before Darian spotted me. His hand shot up like he was greeting an old friend. Loud, animated, fake. "Hey, Riven, come here for a sec." I should have known better. That tone never led anywhere good. I walked over slowly, wary. A few guests were standing nearby, sipping drinks and chatting. He made sure to speak just loud enough for them all to hear. "Riven here," he said with a grin, clapping me on the back. "Graciously offered to help out with cleanup tonight, since, he's got the free time." The laughter came sharp and scattered. A few chuckled with discomfort. One man winced behind his glass. I just stood there. I wasn't surprised anymore, just stunned at how quickly he escalated. The mask had slipped. This wasn't teasing, it was control. Public, unmistakable control. I turned toward Marwan across the room, locking eyes with her. I mouthed, "Why?" She looked away, pretending not to see me. Again. Enough. I found her near the coat check 10 minutes later, cornered her as she reached for her clutch. "We need to talk." She didn't argue, just followed me into a quieter hallway near the service doors. The noise of the party faded into a dull echo behind us. I kept my voice low. "Why aren't you saying anything? Why are you letting him do this to me?" She took a breath, didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "I just want tonight to go smoothly. Please don't make things worse." I stared at her, my chest tightening in slow, crushing increments. "I'm not the one making it worse," I said. "He is, you know that." She shook her head slightly, like she couldn't bear hearing the words out loud. "You know how he gets," she said. "It's not worth a scene." "A scene?" My voice cracked. "He's making a scene with me as the punchline over and over again, and you just, what? Pretend it's fine?" She didn't answer. Then, quietly, she added, "Can you just let it go? For me." I felt something inside me shift, crack, tear. That was the moment I knew this wasn't neutrality. It was a choice against me. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just nodded once, turned, and walked away. I made my way to a dim side lounge, barely lit, empty except for a few stacked chairs. I dropped down onto the bench by the far wall and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands dangling. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The ache in my chest was dull and constant. Maybe they're right. Maybe I really am the problem. I let the thought hang there. Maybe I was the common denominator. Every family photo, I was the shadow. Every dinner conversation, the awkward silence. Every holiday, the extra plate no one fought over. Years of swallowing pride, making excuses, shrinking so others didn't feel uncomfortable. It all rushed in at once. And for a brief moment, I wanted to vanish. Just leave. Let them have their perfect rehearsal dinner and clean-cut speeches. Then, faint voices drifted in. I didn't move. 2 cousins walked in, not seeing me in the corner. "That bit at dinner?" one said. "Darian's gone too far. That wasn't funny. It was just nasty." The other nodded, and Marwan just stood there. "I feel bad for Riven." They turned the corner and finally saw me. Startled silence. Then one of them, Emma, I think, took a step forward. "Hey," she said softly. "We didn't know you were in here." I gave a half smile. "Guess I needed a break." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, we see it. What he's doing. You don't deserve it." I nodded. Couldn't say anything, but something in me stopped unraveling. It didn't fix the wound, but it slowed the bleeding. They left shortly after, and I stayed seated, the quiet settling again. A few minutes later, the door opened once more. Grant Mercer. He stepped inside with the kind of quiet that carried weight. He didn't speak right away, just looked around, then spotted me. "You holding up?" he asked, voice calm but steady. "Barely," I admitted. He sat across from me, leaned forward like we were just 2 guys grabbing coffee. "I've worked with men like Darian," he said. "Loud ones. Polished. Always need an audience. They're usually hiding something." I didn't reply, but his words echoed in the back of my mind. "You carry yourself like someone who's been trying not to take up space," he added. "Why is that?" I gave a dry laugh. "Because that's what makes things easier." He didn't argue, just nodded, slow and thoughtful. "You ever think maybe it's time to stop making it easier for everyone else?" I looked at him. He didn't say it like a challenge. He said it like someone who knew the cost. And then he stood. "You need anything," he said. "Come find me." After he left, I sat still for another few minutes. Then I wiped my face, sat up straighter, took one long breath. I've spent my life lowering myself so others could stay comfortable. That ended tonight. I wasn't storming out. I wasn't going to disappear and make it convenient for them. If Darian wanted a war, he was going to get one. Because I was finally standing my ground. And before I could even step back into the ballroom, Darian struck again, this time in a way that stunned the entire room. As I pushed the door open, I heard the distinct clink of a glass being tapped at the mic. That fake cheeriness in his voice gave him away before I even saw his face. "Let's take a quick moment," Darian's voice rang out, "for a little family appreciation." People quieted down. The music dropped to a soft instrumental hum in the background. I stood still just inside the doorway, my back half in shadow. Darian stood center stage, the microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other, grinning like he'd just won a prize. Now, every family's got its stories, its characters, its, let's say, unfinished projects. The crowd chuckled uneasily. I knew where this was going. They didn't. Not yet. He kept smiling as he went on, tone light, but words sharpened like knives. "Some men here tonight still haven't quite found their place in life." A few people glanced around, heads tilted. No one laughed this time. Men who drain their families dry while pretending to be victims. And just like that, the room froze. Faces turned toward me, some slowly, some like they were afraid of what they'd see. Darian's smile widened. Marwan didn't move. She stood 2 steps behind him, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the floor. Not one word left her lips. This wasn't teasing anymore. It wasn't even passive. It was war. I turned. My steps were quiet, steady toward the terrace doors at the far end. My fingers twitched at my sides. I knew what he wanted, to get a reaction, force me to snap, make me the villain in a scene he built. So I walked. For myself. "Hey, Riven!" Darian called behind me, voice echoing through the mic. "Where you going, buddy? We're just talking about you." Gasps. A few murmurs. I could hear them swirl like leaves in a draft. I stopped, closed my eyes for a second, then turned my head slightly, just enough to let him know I heard. My jaw clenched. My spine stayed straight. I didn't say a word. Marwyn stepped forward, not toward me, but toward him. She placed a hand on Darian's arm and whispered something. I could only catch pieces. Enough. Embarrassing us. But not once did she say it was wrong. Not once did she call it what it was. A lie. An attack. She looked at me and didn't look long, then dropped her eyes again. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how practiced it felt. Darian leaned back into the mic, laughing. "Well, hey," he said, gesturing toward me. "Let's give a round of applause to the family's charity case. Riven Halden." A few half-drunk guests clapped. A few more winced. One woman, an aunt maybe, said under her breath, "This is getting ugly." I turned around fully this time. No expression. Just stillness. "Come on, Riven," Darian smirked. "Say a few words. Tell everyone how it feels living off your baby sister." The silence in the room thickened. Grant Mercer, standing near the back wall, took a single step forward, eyes narrowed, observing, measuring. I knew what this was, and I knew what would happen if I let him have the last word. So I walked, each step deliberate, no rush, no hesitation. Murmurs rose. Someone whispered my name. I climbed onto the small stage beside him and reached out for the mic. Darian handed it over, smug. He assumed I'd stammer or flail, fall apart in front of everyone. Instead, I said nothing. I looked straight at him, held his gaze. The room stilled. Then I spoke, slow, calm, every syllable clear. "You've had your turn." That was all it took. The crowd shifted. Someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. I turned my attention outward. "Funny thing about men who belittle others to feel bigger," I began, voice steady. "They're usually hiding something." Eyes turned to Darian now. He blinked, just once, his jaw tensed. A man who's really got it all together doesn't need to tear someone else down to feel tall. My glance flicked toward Grant, just for a beat, enough for Darian to notice, and I ended with, "Enjoy the rest of your evening." I handed the mic to the coordinator and walked off the stage without waiting for applause. There wasn't any, but the room was no longer his. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. I leaned against the railing, letting the buzz of embarrassment burn off like fog. The door burst open behind me. Darian, he stormed toward me, voice sharp but low. "Don't you dare threaten me in front of them." I didn't move. "If you're worried, that tells me everything I need to know." He shoved me, hard. My back hit the metal railing, but I didn't stumble. I looked up and saw two guests inside turn their heads, startled. He was losing grip, and I was no longer playing by his script. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. Not aggressive, not loud, just sure. "This is your last warning," I said. "If you come at me again, I won't stay silent." He stared like he couldn't recognize me. Good, because that version of me, the one who swallowed pain in silence, was gone. And that was the exact moment Darian decided to cross a line he could never walk back from. He stepped back, smiled like he just remembered a punchline, then reached into his jacket pocket. His hand moved slow, theatrical, the kind of movement that said, "Watch this." When his fingers emerged, they were holding a folded paper, creased and handled like it had been read 100 times. He didn't wave it around yet. He just looked at me with that smug, corner-lipped grin of his and said, "This is proof you cost our family over $14,000. Everything went still. I didn't speak. Not because I couldn't, but because I'd never heard that number before in my life. He unfolded the paper, holding it like it was a verdict. Inside the ballroom, people were pressing closer to the glass doors, trying to read through the pane. He raised his voice so they'd all hear him. This right here is the invoice from when Riven forged Dad's signature and mishandled the home repair loan. Marwan had to bail him out of the mess with her savings." He turned the paper outward like it was a trophy. "And we've been covering it up for too long. That ends tonight." This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This wasn't drunk rambling. This was rehearsed, memorized, planned, and it hit me. He didn't bring that paper tonight on a whim. He brought it because this moment had always been his endgame. I stepped forward, slowly, keeping my voice low but firm. "Let me see it." Darian tilted his head like he was confused. I repeated, "Let me see the document." He refolded it quickly, like it was a court exhibit, tucked it into his palm. "I don't need to show you anything," he said under his breath. "I just need them to believe it." That's when I understood. It wasn't about facts. It was about painting a story loud enough to drown out the truth. Behind us, the doors swung open. I turned. Marwan rushed out barefoot, heels in hand, her face pale, eyes wide. She didn't ask what was happening, didn't ask what the paper said. She looked straight at Darian and asked, "Did he really do it?" Then her gaze landed on me. It wasn't searching for reassurance. It was scanning for guilt. I swallowed once, my throat dry, but I forced my voice to stay even. "You think I would ever do something like that to you?" Her breath hitched. She didn't answer, just looked away. And that silence, that was what tore me open. Not the accusation, not the lies, but her choosing doubt over me without even asking for my side. It wasn't anger that rose inside me. It was grief, and Darian felt it. He smelled blood in the water and went for the kill. He raised his voice again, stepping toward the guests at the entrance. "He's a parasite," he barked. "He's lived off you for years, and I've got proof." Now more guests were coming outside. Aunts, cousins, people who had barely spoken to me in months, suddenly pretending they had a right to weigh in. Darian lifted the paper high in the air. $14,000, he shouted, and he forged our father's name to get it. Someone in the crowd called out, "Then show it." Another said, "Why won't you just hand it over?" Darian snapped, "Because it's confidential. You don't just flash financial records around." They didn't buy it. I saw their faces, narrowed eyes, skeptical frowns. The longer he held onto that sheet, the more they realized something didn't add up. Darian saw it too. His shoulders tensed. He turned back toward me and shoved, harder this time. My back hit the metal railing again. This time, I felt it through my ribs. A gasp shot through the crowd. A security guard near the ballroom door moved forward. Grant stepped outside, arms crossed, eyes locked on Darian, like he was just waiting for the last puzzle piece to fall. I stood up straight, brushing my jacket. Then I spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If that document's real, hand it to me." Darian looked cornered. Eyes darted, fingers twitching at the folded sheet. Then he panicked. He tried to stuff the paper back into his jacket. I moved first. I reached out, not to hit, not to grab, just to hold his wrist. Firm, unshaking. The paper slipped from his hand and fluttered to the ground. Grant stepped forward, planted one foot over it. Darian lunged, but Grant bent down, scooped it up, and straightened with the slow control of a man who already knew what he'd find. He unfolded it, glanced down once, then again, raised one brow. "This," he said calmly, "isn't a debt statement. It's a fabricated invoice." People around him murmured. He held it up. "It uses my company's old logo. We haven't used this version in 8 years. Someone whispered, "You're kidding." I looked at Darian. His face had gone slack. The color drained. Grant's tone stayed even. "You forged this." He turned and handed it to me. I scanned it. The font was wrong. The figures weren't aligned. The math didn't even add up properly. There were spelling errors. 2 inconsistent dates. It was a child's attempt at deception, under the assumption that no one would check. Darian stammered, It's not what it looks like." But no one was listening to him anymore. The air had shifted. Guests stepped back, physically putting distance between themselves and the man who had just tried to ruin me. Marwyn stood frozen, staring down at her hands. She didn't speak. The security guard moved closer and said softly, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away." Darian looked at me, eyes wild, and I said, just loud enough to carry, "You did this to yourself." The words landed like a pin dropped in a chapel. I didn't yell. I didn't spit or curse or throw anything. I just let the truth land. And inside the ballroom, something even bigger was about to explode, because Grant was done staying silent. He walked ahead of me, the forged paper in one hand, his expression unreadable. The moment we crossed the threshold back into the room, the chatter died. People sensed something had shifted. Grant moved with the steadiness of a man who knew exactly what needed to be said, and exactly how to say it. He reached the microphone without hesitation and tapped it once, sharp, intentional. The ballroom fell into total silence. I stayed near the back, hands at my sides, breath tight. Darian slipped in behind me, trying to look composed, but I could see the sweat at his collar, the way his eyes darted, not with confidence anymore, but calculation. Grant looked across the crowd and said, "I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but what just happened outside can't be ignored." He held up the paper. "This document," he began, "was presented a few minutes ago as a debt statement supposedly tied to my company's records." A pause, long enough for every set of eyes to shift toward Darian. "But it is not a debt statement," Grant continued. "It is a forgery." Gasps cut through the quiet like cracks in glass. Grant didn't stop there. "This paper uses our outdated logo, retired over 8 years ago. The formatting doesn't match any invoice protocol we've used. The ID codes don't align with our system. And the math?" He held it closer. "Not even correct." Darian opened his mouth, but Grant lifted a single hand, silencing him without saying a word. "Let me be very clear," Grant said, voice steady but edged. "Using my company's name to fabricate financial evidence is a federal offense." You could feel the air thicken. Darian looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Then it happened. A woman near the family tables whispered not quietly, "He tried to frame Riven." The murmurs grew louder. Another voice asked, "Why would you do that to her brother?" I felt rooted in place, not by fear, but disbelief. It was the first time I wasn't shrinking under the noise. I was standing in it, watching the tide turn. Marwyn stood beside the cake table, hands trembling, staring at Darian like she'd never seen him before. She whispered, "Darian, tell me this isn't true." He didn't answer, because he couldn't, and Grant, steady as ever, turned slightly toward me and said, "You should be up here." The room parted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just quiet movement. People stepping aside, clearing a path I never thought I'd walk. My chest was tight, but I kept going. Slow, measured steps. I felt eyes on me, some soft, some regretful, others heavy with guilt. They all looked different than they had an hour ago. All my life I let them speak over me, I thought. Tonight I won't. I stepped up, took the mic. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I've never asked this family for a single dollar," I said. Silence. "I've never lived off my sister, and if I had ever done anything to hurt her, especially financially, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be gone, and I'd stay gone." My eyes found Marwan's. Her cheeks were streaked with quiet tears. I looked at Darian. "You've lied about me for years. Whispers, half-truths, full-out fabrications. Tonight, you tried to bury me with a lie you printed on your own laptop." A beat of silence fell so thick I could feel it in my chest, and then a murmur, one that carried like a wave of truth. Darian's mouth twisted, his voice suddenly sharp. "This is being blown completely out of proportion." Nobody flinched. Nobody defended him. Then, in a last-ditch effort, he rushed toward Grant like he could stop the fallout by sheer will. Security moved fast. 2 men stepped between them. One guest shouted, "Get him out of here!" Darian pivoted toward Marwan. "Honey, come on. You know everything I do is for us." But Marwan didn't move toward him. She didn't say his name like a lifeline. Instead, she took one slow step backward. Her voice cracked as she said, "You humiliated my brother, and now you humiliate me." Darian's face collapsed into something that looked less like defiance and more like desperation. Then Grant took the mic one last time. "Darian Holt," he said, "as of this moment, you are terminated from my company." The room gasped. Grant didn't flinch. "And this document," he added, holding the fake invoice up, "will be turned over to our corporate security division for investigation." Darian's hands twitched. His eyes flicked toward the exits like he wanted to bolt but didn't know where to go. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. The silence that followed wasn't kind. It was verdict-level silence. I didn't wait to see what he did next. I handed the mic back to the coordinator, walked off the platform, and passed Darian without glancing at him. He collapsed into a chair, hunched over, isolated by the very guests he'd tried to impress. Marwan caught up to me near the hallway. She reached out, her fingers brushing my sleeve. "I'm so sorry," she said, barely audible. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. "It's too late for tonight," I said quietly, "but not forever." Her eyes watered, but she nodded. Grant stepped forward then, just a few feet behind her. He didn't say much, just gave a small, firm nod. "This isn't over," he said, voice low but sure. "But you handled it with more grace than most grown men I've seen under fire." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. And as I stepped outside for air, I finally realized what all of this had cost me, far beyond anything money could measure. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the glow from the ballroom spilling out through the windows like the last remnants of a storm. The air was cooler than I remembered. Still, it carried the heat of everything that had just unfolded. I walked slowly toward my car, not in a hurry, not escaping, just moving. My chest felt heavy, not with regret, but with the quiet ache that follows a war you didn't want but had to fight anyway. It wasn't just Darian's lies I had confronted tonight. It was years of swallowing words, smiling through disrespect, biting my tongue for the sake of keeping peace. 100 moments where I let people believe less of me because it was easier than proving otherwise. I leaned back against my car, letting the metal press into my spine, grounding me. My head tilted back toward the stars, or what little I could see of them through the light pollution and wedding spotlights. There was a phrase that used to loop in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. Something someone once said to me in passing that dug in deeper than they probably meant. You're better off staying in the background. For years I believed that, lived it, made a home out of it. But standing out here now, after everything, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt real. I didn't hear her steps at first, just felt the shift in the air beside me. "Riven," Marwin said softly. I turned. She looked tired, not just physically, but in the way people look when illusions finally fall apart. Her makeup had faded and her eyes were rimmed with red. "I didn't know what to believe," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I studied her face, the one that used to defend me against bullies in grade school, the one that used to sneak me her allowance when Mom cut my lunch money short. And now? That face had hesitated. I didn't snap, didn't raise my voice. I just asked what had been burning a hole in me all night. "Why was it so easy for you to believe him over me?" She looked down. Her voice cracked. "Because he made me feel like if I questioned him, I'd lose everything. And I wasn't ready to lose everything." My reply came quiet, sharp. "And what did that cost me?" She didn't answer, didn't need to. The silence said enough. I loved my sister. That hadn't changed. But trust, once cracked, doesn't fall back into place like nothing happened. It splinters. It takes time, sometimes a long time, to fit again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Can we fix this?" I didn't lie to her. Couldn't. "Not tonight," I said. "Maybe someday, but not tonight." Just then, the venue doors opened. 2 security guards walked Darian through slowly. He wasn't resisting, wasn't saying anything, really. He looked stunned, like someone who still thought this might be a nightmare he'd wake from. He spotted Marwin and tried to step toward her. She backed up. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His shoulders slumped, his tie crooked, his eyes glassy. A man who had built everything on illusion and watched it all turn to dust. The security guard opened the rideshare car door. Darian got in without a fight. No drama, no scene, just gone. I didn't feel triumph, no joy, no smug satisfaction, just a slow exhale. The kind that comes after years of holding your breath. That was the cost of truth, sometimes. Peace didn't always look like a celebration. Sometimes it looked like quiet relief. Grant stepped out a moment later, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't come up with any fanfare, just a calm presence walking toward me. "You handled yourself better than most men in your position," he said. I nodded. I just couldn't let him lie anymore. Grant's face was unreadable, but his eyes softened just a little. "If you ever want a job," he added, "call me. I like men who stand on truth." I blinked. "You'd hire me?" "You think people like Darian make it far in real companies?" he said. "No, but people who stand tall after being torn down, they do." Then he gave me one last look, one I'd remember longer than any offer. "Don't shrink yourself to make others feel taller." He turned and headed back inside, leaving those words in the air like a signpost. I stood there for a few more minutes before walking toward the garden near the edge of the lot. It was quiet, tucked between a row of trimmed hedges and a few stone benches. I sat, let the stillness settle. My mind circled back through everything, the confrontation, Marwin's tears, Grant's words, and finally, me. I may have lost my sister's trust tonight, I thought, but I finally regained my own. The thought didn't come with fireworks. It was more like a steady drumbeat, reminding me I wasn't broken, just waking up. There was a life I hadn't allowed myself to picture before. A future that didn't hinge on proving myself to people who never saw me clearly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. That phrase echoed again. Stay in the background. Only now I had a response. Not anymore. I got up slowly, walked back to my car, slid into the seat, shut the door, and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. No suit or speech or applause could change what I saw now. Just me. Not who I had been, who I was becoming. I'm done being the family's shadow, I said softly. And with that, I started the engine and drove off into the quiet Pennsylvania night. No need for a grand exit, no crowd watching, just a man choosing his next chapter.